the real story behind the 10-year delay, and it was 10 years, on Archbishop Fulton Sheen's cause for canonization and all the politics behind it. I'm going to break it all down in this episode of Forward Boldly. Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. So it's the answer to many prayers, years of prayers, including my own, that Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen's cause for canonization is finally moving forward. The Pillar broke the news that after years of delay, the Vatican has set the date for his beatification for this September. Now, I myself reached out to a high-ranking source who's part of this process, and this person confirmed that the news is indeed true. Not that I'd ever doubted the Pillar, but I'm a journalist myself. I have my own sources. Reached out to them, and they confirmed. Now, I don't have permission to reveal this person's name, but this person is in a position to absolutely know. So this is tremendous news. Praised be Jesus Christ. One of the hopes that was expressed when Pope Leo was elected back in May of 2025, among a number of different hopes, was that Archbishop Sheen's beatification would finally move forward. That was one of the hopes that was expressed. And thanks be to God, this hope is now being fulfilled. Now, that is, of course, assuming that yet another obstacle doesn't come along to cause a delay. But I have a feeling that's not going to happen, considering the two people principally involved in causing the delay are now resigning. And that would be Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York and Bishop Salvatore Matano of Rochester. Now, Cardinal Dolan's resignation was announced in December. He turned 75 in February, and as is required by church law, you have to turn in your resignation at the age of 75. Now, the Pope, of course, has the choice of either accepting the resignation or not accepting it, and allowing the bishop just to continue presiding over his diocese, and that actually happens quite a lot. There's some bishops that continue presiding over their dioceses for years after they turn 75, but they all have to submit their resignation. It's just up to the Pope to decide whether or not to accept it or reject it. In this case, Pope Leo accepted it when he turned 75. But Pope Leo had made clear a few months back that he was going to return to the tradition of accepting resignations closer to the age of 75 instead of just allowing them to continue on for years. So, whatever the motives, Pope Leo accepted Cardinal Dolan's resignation and has named Bishop Ronald Hicks from Illinois to be his successor in New York. And those who understand know that the New York Archdiocese is one of the most important sees in the entire country. Some people say it's the most important. Other people say it's Washington, D.C. Some people say it's Baltimore. But it's way up there. And so Bishop Hicks is going to take over officially on February 6th. And then, this is also very interesting, another New York resignation. January 7th of this year, it was announced that Bishop Matano, someone that we will be talking about a lot later on in this show, is also retiring. He's in the Rochester Diocese, and that was, interestingly enough, the former diocese of Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. And then just days after learning about Matano's resignation, we learn that Sheen's cause is finally moving forward. So just kind of sort of speculating, are the resignations connected in any way, or is this all just coincidence? Learn about all the background, behind the scenes details and all the machinations that I'm going to share with you in this episode, and you decide. Now, I should clarify that it does appear that things have smoothed over a bit between the Peoria Diocese and New York and Rochester, and that apparently New York and Rochester have been very helpful towards Sheen's cause, and I think that's a great thing. That's a very good thing. I'm glad to hear that. I hope that continues. But there is a big backstory to all this that most people just don't know about. I did a lot of reporting on this. I was actually the lead reporter back when I was at Church Militant on Archbishop Sheen. I published many reports on this, and there's a huge backstory, many details that perhaps New York and Rochester would like us conveniently to forget all about, but I haven't forgotten about it. And I think it's important that we remember what happened. It seems in the life of some saints, well, pretty much all saints, God deliberately allows obstacles during their lives. Obviously, that's how you become a saint. That's how you're sanctified, is primarily through obstacles, through sufferings. But with some saints, God also allows roadblocks and obstacles after their deaths on the path to being raised to the altar. So you look at, for instance, St. Joan of Arc, okay? This is someone who died back in the 1400s. That's when she was burned at the stake. And yet it took until 1909, centuries and centuries and centuries later, for her to finally be beatified. And in the 1921, she was finally canonized. Why did it take so long? Was it because she just, there were no miracles? She wasn't considered sufficiently holy? She wasn't answering prayers? No, none of that. It was politics. Because think about it, if you know her story at all, St. Joan of Arc is the patron saint of France, and there's a reason for that. It's because she helped France to crush the English. And as we know, if you know the history of France and England, they have been at war for centuries and centuries and centuries. Bitter enemies for centuries upon centuries. And St. Joan of Arc signifies the defeat of the English at the hands of the French. And so, for a number of years, it was just not politically expedient to canonize her. There might have been some other things going on as well, but unfortunately, sometimes politics gets in the way. And, what's really interesting, too, about St. Joan of Arc is it shows that saints can sometimes get things wrong. I'm not talking about St. Joan of Arc. I'm talking about other saints who lived during the time of St. Joan of Arc, who would go on later to become saints, who at the time that she was alive and they were alive, believed all the lies that she was a witch. So they actually believed the English bishops, okay, who were prosecuting Joan. They actually believed the English bishops when they claimed that St. Joan of Arc, at the time, of course, she wasn't a saint. She was just Joan, the Maid of Orleans, that she was a witch. So some of these devout Catholics believed the English church, the English bishops, when they accused her of that. And of course, that was totally wrong. Turned out to be completely wrong. And she became a saint. And then some of these people who were mistaken about her also became saints. So it's interesting that, well, really, canonization doesn't mean that everything that you've ever said and done is correct. Rather, what it looks at is, have you exhibited any heroic virtues? Also, you look at sort of the corpus of your teaching. Was the entirety of your teaching orthodox? Were you basically a holy individual? Did you manifest that holiness? Even if in some cases you may have made mistakes. You may have been wrong on this or that. Now, for those unfamiliar with Archbishop Sheen and his legacy, and I don't know how you could be if you've lived here in the United States, he was the beloved and popular New York bishop who came to prominence for his TV show titled Life is Worth Living. And just as a side note, what a wonderful name for a show. Life is Worth Living. Because it is. Life is truly worth living. That was the name of his show. And it played throughout the 1950s. Won numerous awards. It was watched in millions, like tens of millions of households in America. And you have to understand, this was especially amazing considering America is overwhelmingly Protestant. It has Protestant roots. It's overwhelmingly Protestant. Catholics have always been a minority. And from day one, quite frankly, they've endured a lot of misunderstanding, discrimination in the early colonies, some persecution from Protestants, primarily from Puritans. I myself am hoping to do a documentary on anti-Catholic bigotry in early America because a lot of people don't know about this, including Catholics. But it is remarkable that in the 1950s, a fully Catholic archbishop, in his full bishop regalia, teaching Orthodox Catholic doctrine on mainstream media, so popular, so beloved, won so many awards. I think that's remarkable. He received thousands of letters. On a weekly basis, he had a massive following and a massive impact on the public. He actually helped to convert a number of individuals, many of them celebrities, important personages, including Hollywood stars. One of my favorite anecdotes about him concerned a drunk woman that he encountered when he was at St. Patrick's in London. She came in, she was a mess. He decided to lead her to the rectory gate, give her a little tea, help her to sober up a little bit, and they had a little conversation. And he learns that she was the star in a local musical. And so Sheen asked her to return to church once she's sober and they could have a talk about things. So she said, okay, but she made him promise not to ask her to go to confession. And so he promised. He said, okay, I won't ask. So she later returns. This time she's sober. And he offers to give her a tour of the church. So they're walking around. He's explaining aspects of the church. And as they pass by the confessional, he pushes her in. He kept his promise that he wouldn't ask her to go to confession because he didn't ask. He didn't ask anything. He just pushed her in. And then she ends up making a full confession. And you know what's amazing? Years later, she would actually leave the stage to give her life to Christ as his spouse, become a religious, become a nun, and she would join a convent. Amazing. 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 I mean, there's so many stories like that in Archbishop Sheen's life. He was instrumental in the conversion of Bella Dodd. This is a former member of the Communist Party. As we know, Sheen was a fierce critic of communism. He wrote and spoke a great deal about communism's dangers. And many of his talks are very prescient and they're very applicable to and relevant to today's times. And like I said, helped so many people, celebrities and non-celebrities, to convert. And you know, I think the one thing that is the most important thing to know about him is that he always credited his successful ministry to his daily holy hour. He made a commitment as a young priest always to keep a holy hour, to sit before our Lord in adoration for 1 hour per day. And he kept that promise throughout the entirety of his life for decades until the very end. And he always credited his success in ministry and his apostolate to that holy hour. And I know some priests who do this. I don't know very many priests, but I do know some. And I notice that their ministries are extremely fruitful, very fruitful. Not just that, they seem to be filled with a greater zeal, greater joy, all of that. If only more priests would do a daily holy hour. How amazing would that be? I guarantee you, God would bless your ministry in abundance and make it even more fruitful than it already is. I'm a huge advocate of Eucharistic adoration, not just for priests, but for everyone. Sheen also had a deep devotion to Our Lady, he loved to speak about Our Lady. He wrote a poem about Our Lady. But here's the sad thing. His remarkable success, his popularity, all of that. And he was a brilliant man as well. He was absolutely brilliant academically. His success led to envy among his fellow clergy. And they treated him rather badly in New York. And it is a sad fact that our clergy, our religious, our bishops are very human. Very human. In spite of the sacred office that they inhabit, they are very human. They can be very human, which is why they need prayer. And they can get jealous of other clergy's success and then unfortunately mistreat them. In fact, Sheen's own bishop, Cardinal Francis Spellman, caused him many problems. So here's one, probably the most well-known. In 1957, the U.S. government donated millions of dollars in milk powder to the Archdiocese of New York to distribute to the poor. And so Sheen was in charge of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith. And they took this milk and they went ahead and distributed it to the intended recipients, to the poor. But Cardinal Spellman demanded that Sheen pay for the milk, claiming that he owed the Archdiocese $1 million for that milk powder. And Archbishop Sheen said, that's not right. And the case was appealed. It went all the way to Rome. And it ended up with Pope Pius XII actually speaking with President Eisenhower on the phone and learning that the milk had been donated by the U.S. government entirely free of charge. Totally free of charge. And so Pope Pius sided with Sheen. But not wanting to embarrass or humiliate his superior, Sheen's superior, he tried to smooth over the waters. He kind of dismissed them from the room and simply saying forgiveness is divine and to encourage them to go in peace. And he gave them his blessing. They leave the room, the papal office. Once outside, Spellman reportedly threatened Sheen saying that he would get even one day. And guess what? That same year, Sheen's show, which was still at its peak with 30 million regular viewers, was canceled. Sheen lost his position at the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, and then Spellman eventually banished him to what some have called ecclesiastical Siberia, meaning the small diocese of Rochester. And what's very interesting, too, is that you don't hear any of this in Sheen's autobiography. You can read it. He left it out completely. But it is clear from his writings, many of his writings, in fact, he writes beautifully, and it was very clear he had very deep, intense thoughts about the faith. He knew what it was to suffer. He knew what it was to suffer. One of the best books, and I think it's mandatory reading for every single priest, if you really want to understand what the priesthood is about, is the book by Archbishop Sheen titled "The Priest is Not His Own." It's incredible because he focuses on the one aspect of priesthood that he believes is primary above every other aspect. It is the victim. The priest is victim, just like Christ. But in his writings, in his autobiography, he only obliquely mentions some of the problems with the cardinal and fellow clergy in a couple of lines where he writes that he endured, quote, trials inside and outside the church, and, quote, I am certain that it is God who made certain people throw stones at me. So he had a very supernatural view, just like so many saints do. Instead of blaming the people and getting angry at the individuals who threw stones at him and who were unjust, who envied, who mistreated him, instead of blaming them, he took a supernatural view. He looked to God and he realized God allowed this. God allowed this. For his own mysterious purposes, God allowed it. He's very humble and very insightful. Well, decades after his death, New York clergy were still throwing stones, or better put, putting up obstacles in his path to sainthood. So as a little background, like I said, I was the lead reporter on Archbishop Sheen back when I worked at Church Militant. I published numerous articles, reports, and videos on Archbishop Sheen, specifically detailing litigation that took place between Sheen's last living relative, which was his niece, Joan Sheen Cunningham, and Cardinal Timothy Dolan of the Archdiocese of New York. Now, in order to understand the lawsuit, you actually have to go all the way back to the death of Archbishop Sheen himself. 5 days before his death, Archbishop Sheen executed a will directing that his funeral service be celebrated at St. Patrick's Cathedral, but that his burial be in Calvary Cemetery, which is the official cemetery of the Archdiocese of New York. Now, Cardinal Terence Cook approached his niece, Joan, who was his last living relative, who spent the last few years of his life, she was his main caretaker. She was very, very close to him, considered him like a second father. The last living relative with rights over his remains. And Cardinal Cook asked permission to bury him not in Calvary Cemetery, but rather in the crypt of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And Joan consented. Bishop Daniel Janke, you have to go now to Peoria, he's the one who had opened Sheen's cause for canonization in 2002. And he relied on multiple assurances by then head of the New York Archdiocese, Cardinal Edward Egan, that New York had no interest in opening Sheen's cause. Isn't that interesting? The New York Archdiocese had no interest in opening Sheen's cause. It was the Diocese of Peoria, which is where Sheen was born, where he was raised, where he went to seminary and was ordained. It was Peoria that launched his cause. And so, like I said, Bishop Janke got assurances from Cardinal Egan that when it was time, when the time was right and the beatification was about to move forward, that New York would transfer Sheen's remains over to Peoria. He promised that. He made those assurances directly to Bishop Janke. And so, relying on those promises, the Peoria Diocese spent approximately $1 million over the course of about 16 years or so, longer, investigating and advancing his cause. Now, during that time, an amazing miracle was certified through the intercession of Archbishop Sheen. James Fulton Engstrom was stillborn, little baby boy. He had no heartbeat, no breath. He was essentially dead for 61 minutes. No heartbeat, okay? No breathing for 61 minutes. And the parents begged everyone they could, pray to Archbishop Sheen for a miracle, pray to him for a miracle, pray to him for a miracle. And as you know, his middle name is Fulton, named after Archbishop Sheen. And everybody is begging Archbishop Sheen for a miracle. Now, keep in mind, if your brain is deprived of oxygen even for a few minutes, you're going to have severe brain damage. I mean, essentially it's, okay, you're going to live, but you're going to be severely brain damaged for the rest of your life. This is 61 minutes, okay? 61 minutes of basically being clinically dead. And suddenly, out of the blue, they detect a heartbeat. Then he starts to breathe. Amazing. No explanation for it at all. He starts to breathe. And what is even more amazing is that James didn't have any brain damage at all. Grew up to be a totally normal, healthy, happy boy. Now, a young man through the intercession of Archbishop Sheen. So this was the miracle that was certified. And that was enough to advance to beatification. So this is when Bishop Jenke went back to the New York Archdiocese, reminding them of their promise to transfer Sheen's remains, because here we have a miracle. We're ready to move forward with the beatification. And guess what? Cardinal Timothy Dolan said no. He claimed that Joan didn't want it, that Joan didn't want his body moved. I'm not sure why he said this, but it was false. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he thought she didn't want him to leave. Maybe they had a conversation where he was able to convince her initially that Sheen should say, I don't know, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, because I would hate to think that a cardinal of the church just outright lied about this. I spoke directly several times with Joan back when she was alive. She passed away, God rest her soul. But I spoke with her several times, and she explained to me she absolutely wanted his remains moved. That she had a few private meetings with Cardinal Dolan, and he insisted that he was trying to give her reasons for why Archbishop Sheen needs to stay, and she was expressing that she wanted, Sheen to be moved to Peoria. And she's an elderly lady, okay? Just imagine, she's a very elderly lady, and here's Cardinal Dolan essentially trying to pressure her, and she's the one with the rights over his body. She was the one with the rights over his body. It's not the church. It's the last living relative with the rights. And I don't know what took place in those private meetings. All I know is what Joan told me, that he was trying to tell her it's best if we just keep him here, and she's, objecting, not wanting that. And when it becomes clear that Cardinal Dolan was not going to release the body, she had no choice but to bring a lawsuit. I'm sure she didn't want to do that. Who wants to sue the church? She's a faithful Catholic. She was giving money to the diocese, but they were refusing to do her wishes over a body over which she had the rights. And this was making it very difficult to advance his cause for beatification. And so, like I said, she had no choice but to sue the archdiocese to release the remains. And the court ruled in Joan's favor. And so the whole thing could have ended very quickly. But guess what? The New York Archdiocese appealed the ruling, causing the lawsuit to drag on for many more months. So then the appeals court rules in favor of Joan. But does the Archdiocese accept it? No. It appeals again and again and again. In fact, Cardinal Dolan's Archdiocese appeals the court rulings a total of 5 times, causing the litigation to drag on for 3 long years. And the worst part is that the Archdiocese spent hundreds of thousands of dollars paying legal fees, paying lawyers, using Catholic money to do so. I remember at the time I wrote about it, and I think the law firm charges like a minimum of like $750 per hour, and that was like for the lower level attorneys. I can't even imagine how much money the Archdiocese shelled out to fight this. for 3 years. And again, it's Catholic money that they're using. Unbelievable. So finally, a final ruling was issued, putting the whole thing to rest, giving Joan the clear right to move her uncle's remains to Peoria. And so they were ecstatic. Joan and the Peoria Diocese were ecstatic because the Vatican had made clear we can't move forward with the beatification until this litigation is over. So it ends. Bishop Janke contacts the Vatican. The Vatican sets the beatification initially for September 2019. Cardinal Dolan was forced to finally hand over Sheen's remains to Peoria. So this is back when I'm still working at Church Militant, and we were tipped off by an inside source that the disinterment from the crypt of St. Patrick's Cathedral would take place on June 27th, 2019 at 5 a.m. And no media were being invited. This was going to be a absolutely private affair and no publicity. So what do? Of course, a small team decides to fly out secretly to New York to make sure that we were there on the scene to get footage of this historic event that we'd been waiting so long for, so many years. Like I said, we'd spent so many years reporting on this, the entire, the litigation, the roadblocks, everything, and that there was just going to be no way that we were going to miss this. And so this was actually very exciting. We flew out to New York, like I said, a very small team of us. We landed, I think, in the evening, got to New York City, got to our hotel, and then decided to sort of walk around New York City at night. Went to Times Square and went to various other, landmarks and things like that. Then finally got to bed around midnight. We only got 3 hours of sleep because we had decided we got to wake up at 3 a.m. and go scope out St. Patrick's Cathedral and sort of stand guard there before people started to arrive. And so there are 3 entrances to St. Patrick's Cathedral. There is the front, the main entrance, and then you have the 2 side entrances, one facing 51st Street and one facing 50th Street. And so we each stood guard in our own, before each entrance. And I just happened to be outside the entrance facing 51st Street, I believe, if I recall correctly. And that would actually be the entrance where this was going to take place. And so we decided to text each other on our phones to let us know, to alert, the other people, like, hey, someone's coming, someone's here, get over here right now. And so we're waiting. I just remember it was just really interesting because here I am, sitting on a New York City side street, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course, I've never been in New York City at 3 o'clock in the morning. And this was back when I guess things felt safer. I would never do that now. But I just remember it was kind of like a cool evening, summer, and it was quiet. I was surprised. I thought there would be lots of noise, but it was actually very quiet. The city that never sleeps seemed to be in slumber. And, there's a little occasional traffic here or there, occasional car and a little, maybe a straggler on the sidewalk. But otherwise, it was very quiet. And I had my hoodie over my head because I was trying to go incognito. I didn't want anyone to see who I was or get any sort of suspicion. And so we just waited and we waited and we waited. And then 4:45 a.m., the first car drives up. And I believe from that first car, Joan Sheen Cunningham emerged. And I am like trying to text the other people, letting them, oh, get over here now, they're here. And my phone went dead without explanation. It simply went dead. It wouldn't work. Made no sense whatsoever. So I'm like, what is going on with my phone? This has never happened before. So I decided, let's turn it off, turn it back on. I know I have a full battery. It's not that. And nothing's happening. It will not let me text. Literally nothing is happening with my phone. And I can't alert them. And so I'm praying. I'm like, okay, they need to get over here. Please, God, alert them. Let them know. Just get them over here. They need to get over here. And again, I'm still trying to frantically work with my phone to see what's going on. And thankfully, I see them coming around the corner. And I'm like waving at them saying, someone's here. And apparently, I guess they had seen from their side that a car had passed by. And so they were following it. So thankfully, they knew, they came. And here's the amazing thing. So we waited another hour. Finally, 5:55, long time, wait an hour. And finally, people started to emerge from the church, walking down the church steps. We saw Joan Sheen Cunningham. We saw a few other people, some men in suits. We saw some clergy coming out. Did not see Cardinal Dolan. He wasn't there. And then we finally saw the casket come out. And it was very exciting. I got all of it on my phone. Extremely excited. That was why we were here, to get footage of this. And I think that I may be the only person in the entire world to have captured the full footage of Archbishop Sheen's emergence from St. Patrick's Cathedral and his transfer into the car, heading off to the airport to be taken to the Peoria Diocese. I think I am the only person in the world to have that. There was another crew member who got some footage, but they accidentally deleted it. And fortunately, we still have that footage, still preserved. And so I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that I was able to be there for that historic moment. And here's the thing, though. Another delay. We're all set for the beatification to take place. Like I said, it was initially supposed to take place in September, but then it was delayed to December. And you know why it was delayed? This is what most of the public didn't know. It was delayed because the Bishop of Rochester, Salvatore Matano, called up the Vatican and he lodged objections. He asked for a delay. And this is what happened. He sends them papers about 2 allegations of mishandling of abuse of clergy by Archbishop Sheen. 2 cases. And so the Vatican decides we need to investigate this. We need to postpone this until we can examine the documents. Now, one of the priests was Father Gerard Gooley. He was a former priest of the Rochester Diocese. In 1963, the Rochester Diocese received an allegation that in 1960, Gooley had committed abuse or misconduct against adults. Not minors, but adults. Now, Archbishop Sheen didn't become Rochester's bishop until October of 1966. He was accused of placing Gooley in ministry. But on examination, it turns out that Sheen never placed him in ministry, ever. So those accusations turned out to be completely false. There was no merit to them whatsoever. Another priest was Father John Gormley. He was accused of abusing children in 1969. And on examination, it turns out that Archbishop Sheen immediately removed him from ministry. So he acted rightly. So these 2 cases of alleged priest abuse mishandling turned out to be without merit. Sheen was fully exonerated. So the Vatican announces a beatification date in December. But guess what? Bishop Matano once again contacts the Vatican and asks that it be delayed, this time claiming that the New York Attorney General was in the middle of an active investigation into clergy sex abuse. If you recall, back in 2019, multiple states' attorney generals around the country were doing active investigations into clergy abuse because of Cardinal McCarrick, the Summer of Shame. That was all in 2018. So multiple states decided we're going to start investigating clergy sex abuse in our own states to find out if any other clergy are abusing minors. And so the New York Attorney General launched an investigation into clerical abuse in all the dioceses of New York. And Bishop Matano said, as long as this investigation is going on, what if they turn up another allegation against Sheen? That would really ruin the beatification. So we really should just hold it off. Monsignor James Cruz, who was director of canonical affairs in the Diocese of Peoria at the time, called the bishop's act an act of sabotage. His words, this is what he wrote in an op-ed. Quote, "This pattern is simple. The Sheen cause takes a step forward, and then the Rochester Diocese acts to block the beatification. When examining the pattern, it is hard not to believe that the Diocese of Rochester acts more to sabotage the cause and less to protect the good of the church." So a pretty stinging critique from one member of the clergy against another. So we were all forced to wait because the Vatican decided, okay, yeah, I guess we need to wait. Because if another allegation comes up, it would really mar and taint the beatification. So we'll just wait until this, AG investigation is over. And years pass, and years pass, and years pass, and nothing happens. And I remember contacting the New York Attorney General's office a few times over the course of the years, including, I think it was back in 2024. I contacted them and I said, is your investigation still active? Do you have an estimated time when it's going to conclude? Can we get an idea? And they responded saying that it was still active and they had no estimate as to when it would conclude. And that was where we were left. And so as long as it was indefinite, it seems that Sheen's beatification would be delayed, just forever delayed until this thing was concluded. And yet they wouldn't tell us when they were going to conclude it. But apparently now Letitia James is gone from New York, and the New York Attorney General is no longer actively pursuing this. The investigation has gone stale. And that was, of course, the last obstacle. And so the beatification is set for this September, and I have a feeling that no more roadblocks will arise, and that Archbishop Sheen is well on his path to sainthood. Thanks be to God. And another interesting note, Pope Leo is a native of Illinois, just like Sheen. Two fellow Illinoisans. So I wonder if that plays into any of this. I don't know. I'm just grateful that a giant of the church is finally on his way to being raised to the altars. Venerable, soon to be blessed Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, pray for us. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.